All right. So before we get started, we do have a guest. Emily Rogan is here from United Policyholders. She's here to talk to us about flood insurance, all of the different kinds, including homeowners, renters, and how this is different than just a normal homeowners or renters policy. But first, we just have a few short announcements. One, at the last meeting, we had made an announcement that we have made a Google group, so it's easier for organizations within the countywide co-ed to talk to each other. You just have to email this Google group and your message will go to everyone. On the receiving end, if you don't want to receive one email for every single thing that goes out, you can always change your notification preferences and just get like a digest at the end of the week. This just helps us stay informed about what other people are doing, what they need. So beyond just announcements about what you're doing, this is also a good group, I think, to be asking if other people are applying for funding, that you are looking for partners, and also making resource requests and offers. This is a big one because traditionally they've gone through me, and I've sourced and asked people like, hey, someone just offered masks. Do you need masks? And I think the more equitable and direct way for this to happen is if you have resources to offer, just put it in the Google group, and people can respond from there. So if you haven't been added already, a lot of people were just directly added. If you already subscribed to the group, just email me and I will directly add you. If you want to unsubscribe, it's very easy to unsubscribe, but I do recommend at least staying in the group and just changing your email notifications so you still have access, but you don't have to get an email for every single message that goes out, if that's your preference. Also, before we go on to the next, to partner announcements, Petra just has an event that she would like to share with us coming up this Thursday.
Hi, I'm Petra with Thrive Alliance, and on Thursday at 2:30, we have a virtual training with a new federal funding navigator built for the future, and it will be an opportunity to learn how to get access to funds, both from federal funds, both from the Inflation Reduction Act and from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. So this is a new tool, and because, as we know, it's very hard to find grants, it's very hard to figure out how to navigate them. So the federal government built this really cool tool, and so it's an opportunity to learn how to use it. So I hope you can join for that. I'll put the link in the chat. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me or to Dea, who's also on the line here from Thrive. Thanks.
Thanks, Petra. So with that, let's open it up. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We can just do a quick round of announcements, news that you have before we go into the main presentation. You can also share your news in the chat, but I'm going to go on mute and let someone else take over. Give it another 10 seconds. Last call, y'all.
Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody.
Hey, Jim. Do you have an announcement or are you just saying hi?
I just heard a big silence, so I thought I'd say hi.
Apparently no one has news this week. That's okay.
Well, there is news. Hi, this is Mark Dinan from East Palo Alto. And for what it's worth, the news out of East Palo Alto is LAFCO, the local agency formation commission, I think I have that right, has given the go-ahead for the city of East Palo Alto to absorb the East Palo Alto Sanitary District, which has been slapping on huge unjustified charges to everything from affordable housing to nonprofit center to business development and ADUs and things like that. So there's a lot to it, but that's what's happening right now. Never been through this process, but apparently there's like a 30-day appeal process, then a 60-day to collect signatures. But it's a huge event in East Palo Alto, and then it shakes up the structure of our local government and agencies, and would bringing sewer services into the city of EPA. So that's what's going on in East Palo Alto.
Thanks for the update, Mark.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I don't think this, I mean, I don't know if this is an update. I just wanted to share that we thank you, Anna, for your connection with Shruti from the Department of Emergency Management. We've had some really good conversations around learnings from last year's floods and extensive rains and preparing for this year. So just feeling really good about how 211 can support if there are future disasters, and also just really excited about today's topic because we are still getting calls from people asking, like, you know, I sent this to FEMA, what do I do now? And in United Policyholders is just so crucial to doing that work. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Just in case anyone didn't catch that, Clara's director of 211, and they played a really big role in storm calls and kind of triaging those last winter. And so there's conversations going on about how to like improve and expand those, I think, for any potential disaster coming up this winter or beyond that.
Good morning, everyone. Sherry Burns with Silicon Valley Independent Living Center. We are the Disability Disaster Resource Center for Santa Clara, San Benito, Santa Cruz, Monterey counties, and then we work very closely with CID and San Mateo as well for support during disaster situations, and also to prepare older adults and people with disabilities who rely on power for their medical needs. We were certainly hit very hard last winter, January, with atmospheric rifters, one after another, in busily helping folks who were without power sometimes for 2 weeks. And it was quite busy. One of the things that we've been doing over the course of the year is those people who qualify for portable power stations. We typically use the Yeti Gold Zero units. We send those out to folks that are in those hard hit areas typically, so that they have backup power for the situations. And so we've been doing a lot of that, preparing for the winter storms coming this year, and making sure that people who are in those typical hard to hit areas, and some of those are in the Milpitas area, and then getting close to San Mateo County area, as well as the Santa Cruz Mountains, were very hard hit. So we've gotten a lot of those portable power stations out to them, hopefully, so that we have a lot less emergency calls coming our way.
All right. Any other news, announcements, questions? All right. I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emily Rogan, Senior Program Officer at United Policyholders. Emily, would you like to take over?
All right, I'll start sharing. Thank you so much for having me today. I just wanted to just really commend you for talking about flood insurance and talking about the flood hazards that we have before it's raining. So, you know, it's one of those situations where unless, you know, we've had a winter like we did the previous winter, flood often is kind of, in California, is often like the stepchild of disaster. We focus a lot on wildfire. I am going to just present some information on flood insurance, things that you'll be able to bring to your organizations and to the people you serve. But really, the one thing I want you to know is that we are a resource for you. We don't expect you to come away, knowing everything about flood insurance, but knowing that we are your nonprofit partner that can give you the straight scoop on insurance. It was nice to hear the kind words about our organization. So we are, for anyone who doesn't know United Policyholders, we have a very insurancy name, but we're a nonprofit organization. We've been around for 32 years. So we were started right after the Oakland-Berkeley firestorm. And we are a national organization. So we have a lot of experience in lots of different kinds of disasters because we don't just help the situations that are right in our backyard, but also on a national level. And so, we have a lot of experience. We're funded by donations and grants. We are not funded by insurance company money. So that's kind of why we say we're non-for-profit, not for sale. We don't sell anything. And we are a fairly small organization, but we have a large volunteer corps of both personal disasters, people with personal experience that have lost their homes after a disaster, but also professionals who have experience in disaster recovery, insurance claims that keep us current. Currently, we're working the Maui wildfires, last year's winter storms, or the beginning of this year's winter storms, Hurricane Ian in Florida, and then a lot of wildfire recovery work from the past couple of years, because recovering from a big disaster is a long process. It's, getting through the claims process can take a long time. On the preparedness front, we are at the tail end of our Listos California grant, where we've been able to provide a lot of information to everybody around, just getting prepared and making sure your insurance is part of that plan to get everything together. Typically, when we're talking about preparedness, we're focused on the disaster, the actual disaster. We want everyone to have alerts specific to their county or city, to make a plan on what they're going to do, to have that go bag, but also prepare to stay, and then also to help your friends and neighbors. But our organization, having so much experience with the long-term recovery, we have a unique experience where there are more action steps that we want people to take. We want them to get a hold of their insurance company and do an insurance checkup. Do they have the right kind and right amount of insurance? And when we're talking about flood insurance, a lot of people do not have insurance for flooding, for water that rises. And home inventorying your belongings, the inside and outside of your house, is so critical. It is a huge help after disasters. Digitizing important documents, whether that's policies, medications, just having something that's not just the piece of paper that's in your house if you lose it, is so important. That also goes for, family photos and important things that are special to you. And then taking steps to reduce your risk, hardening your home, creating defensible space. We'll talk a little bit about that in terms of flood, but we encourage everyone to take these extra steps. So when the rain starts to fall, a lot of times these are the messages that we are putting out on social media. These are the messages that we want everyone to have. I went through some of them, but having sandbags is critical. A lot of times cities and counties will have sites where you can pick up sandbags. If all of your organizations are aware of those, that's a wonderful thing to share on your social media, where those stations are. Just getting the word out, it'll help people prepare. And then even if it's not the big storm that we expected, they'll have them in their home. So it's really important to just kind of push those out, whether it's a big storm that's coming or a small one, because the more sandbags people have around their house, the more they'll use them when they're prepping for something that's coming in. So getting that message out. You can place rolled up towels along the inside and exterior doors to prevent water getting in, keeping your gutters clear. This is a great one for storms and also for fires. Moving your valuables up from lower levels, finding a copy of your insurance policy, checking the wording on water damage and the amount of deductible that you have, just so that you have an idea of what your policy, what your insurance coverage says about water damage, and then creating that home inventory. As you'll see on this, we don't have call your agent to purchase flood insurance, because a lot of times flood insurance has a waiting period. You can buy it on December 1st, but it's not going to kick in until 30 days after that. So when the water is falling down, when we hear those words, bomb cyclone, atmospheric river, which feels to me like we didn't hear a lot of those for a while, and then they were, last winter it was every newscast we were having another one of those. That's not the time to think about flood insurance. It might be for the next disaster, but it does take 30 days for the National Flood Insurance program's policy to kick in. So now is the time to start having this conversation and talking to people about that. And we're supposed to have a little bit of rain coming this week. We had a little bit last night up in San Francisco. This is the time to really start thinking about it and preparing for the winter. Because generally speaking, damage from wind-driven rain, or rain that comes from above, maybe that gets in from your roof, or something that is caused by a storm coming down, is covered by your home or renters, maybe your business policy. But damage from rising water is not covered. But you can buy flood insurance to fill that gap. So that's an important piece. And so this is a couple pictures of storm damage, and one of these is covered by your homeowner's insurance policy, and it's the tree that's fallen. When we're talking about water that comes up, or mud that comes in, that is typically covered by flood insurance, not by your home or renter's insurance policy. And these are all disasters that we've worked. And around, when we talk a little bit about the claims process, we'll talk a little bit about how hard it can be for our organization, consumer advocates, to really guide people when they don't have flood insurance in these situations, because there may be coverage through your home or renter's policy, but it's more of doing jujitsu moves to try and make the right argument, as opposed to having the coverage in place. Okay, so we want everyone to just be aware of their flood risk. And last winter was able to show us more, more how vulnerable we can be. We were in the drought for so long that a lot of people forgot that this is also a big hazard. myhazards.caloes.ca.gov, that's one of my favorite places to check your risk, because it's pretty accurate. A lot of the other ones are good for one type of disaster, but might not be as strong for another type. The National Flood Insurance Program does have their maps. I find them I'm a disaster professional, and I find them still pretty difficult to read just as a normal person trying to figure out what your flood risk is. And then I also included, I'm going to go in a little bit more into flood factor, but I included Temblor because it's important to make sure that we're still having the conversation about earthquakes as well. Earthquakes are very similar to flood, where it's just not covered by your standard policy. Okay. So flood factor is relatively new. It's come out in the last maybe 2 years, I want to say 2 or 3 years, where it's kind of gained some momentum. You can put in your specific address to see what your specific risk is for flooding. We found it more accurate. It sounds like they were focused mostly on flood. The wildfire stuff wasn't ringing as true for us. But the great thing is it can show you exactly what the risk for most areas are. So you can really hone into a specific property or specific neighborhood and see what your risk is. And, sometimes stats really can tell that story. So the more we can encourage people to find out what their specific risk is, just the more information they'll have about, like, well, is this, how much should I really be paying attention? Should I invest in this? Because the reality, like I said, flood is not covered under your homeowners or renters policy. Mud flow is not covered under a typical homeowners and renters policy. And then the third one, damage below your deductible, is not covered. And that's a really important point, because if there is all of a sudden water in your house, and we're not talking about the pictures we saw below where there's clear flood damage and you're, stomping around in water or stomping around in mud. when water is coming in, it can be really, you can have that feeling of being scared or, hyper attentive. And the first thing you might do is call your insurance company. But to keep in mind why some of our preparedness tips are to pull out your policy and see what your deductible is, because especially with the increase in cost for homeowners insurance that we've seen in the last couple of years for around the wildfire risks, because costs are coming up. One way that you're able to keep that affordable is by raising your deductible. But if you've raised your deductible to say $5,000, which would help you keep your costs down, and the damage to your home is only $4,000, you're filing a claim that is not more than your deductible, so you're not going to get anything out of your policy. You would have to have, so if you have a $5,000 deductible, and you have, say, $8,000 worth of damage, you would only have access to $3,000, whatever's above your deductible. And so you have to do a little bit of math in there. So the first thing you want to do is help stop whatever you can, mitigate the damage, but then try and take a deep breath. And if it's not a situation where you have to evacuate and your home is physically suffered severe damage, take a moment and make sure you have that information, what your deductible is, so that you're not just filing $0 claims, which will have a really big impact, especially in this climate of high costs. And then the last point is, if you have a mortgage and your home is in that special hazard flood zone, your lender requires flood insurance. So you might also have it. So now is a good time to check your mortgage statement. Do you have it? Are they paying it for you? Is it part of your monthly thing? Are you paying it separately? Do you have it? Okay, so getting more into the nitty-gritty of flood insurance, if you're shopping for it, things to remember is you don't have to be in the highest flood zone to benefit from flood insurance. We're seeing more rains. We're seeing areas that are not necessarily required to have flood insurance have flood damage. And so it's really a personal decision, knowing, you have to know that it's not going to, likely flood damage is not going to be covered under your home policy, which you're paying for. And so just having, doing your own research, figuring out what your own vulnerability is will help you make that decision. And then there is flood insurance available through the National Flood Insurance Program, but there are also private insurance companies. I've listed a couple of them: Neptune, Beyond Flood, Aon, and Chubb, that also sell private flood insurance. And so most people who have flood insurance have it through the National Flood Insurance Program. There are other options. And then if you file a claim, there are completely different rules for both of those two pieces. But you do want to contact your insurance agent when you're talking about adding flood to your renter's insurance policy or to your homeowner's insurance policy. You're going to ask them, how much will it cost to add flood coverage to insure my home so that and belongings if I had a flood? And then ask them to help you compare the cost for a national flood insurance policy and a private company. You're going to be comparing the cost for coverage, but also what kind of coverage is offered. And then, can a private company insure my home for more than $250,000? That is the max that the National Flood Insurance Program will offer. And will it cover temporary rent expenses? That's another big difference. The National Flood Insurance Program does not cover temporary rent. Private insurance companies can. The tough thing here is that it can be very difficult for people to have a red tagged house for flood damage. They have homeowners insurance, but it's not covered, and if they don't have flood insurance, or even if they do have flood insurance, National Flood Insurance Program policies do not cover your temporary rent expenses. That's something that's typically covered under a homeowner's policy, but NFIP policies don't have that coverage. It's a very bare bones policy. And so someone would be having to pay to live in an apartment or somewhere else while their home's being fixed. That is one of the things we see that is very difficult for the long-term recovery when we're talking about big flood events. That's something that we do see a need for charitable dollars to go to help people cover temporary rent expenses when because that is something that a typical flood policy doesn't cover. So getting into the nitty-gritty, again, 30-day waiting period for National Flood Insurance Program policies. Limits, low limits. The residential limit has a $250,000 limit for the dwelling. You have to specifically add contents coverage for your policy. That's something that's almost always included for your home policy, but when you're buying flood, that might not be added, especially if it's related to your mortgage. Your mortgage company is only requiring you to get it for the dwelling. You have to specifically add it to make sure your contents. And that only covers your personal property that's above ground. So if you have a basement that is, that goes 3 feet underground, and you have 3 steps to go down it because it's under street level, below grade, those contents are not covered. So there are a lot of, we really are talking about a bare bones policy here. Let's see. It does not include additional living expense coverage. I said that one, but private insurance options for flood have different limits. So it's good to shop around. You can, that's why we want you to work with an agent to look at national flood insurance policies, but also a private flood insurance. For renters, again, renters, if you have regular renters insurance, it does not cover flooding. You have to add a specific policy, usually through the National Flood Insurance Program. It can be reasonable, but it does not cover that additional living expense coverage. That's a really important point. And it's also really important to have that conversation because you don't want to necessarily buy flood insurance if you live in, say, an in-law that does go underground. You won't get coverage for your belongings. So it's very, we want people to make sure they're buying something that they can actually use. And then when does it kick in? If you do have National Flood Insurance, NFIP policy, it will kick in if 2 or more acres are flooded. It's not just if just your house is flooded, that might not kick in. So there are very specific rules of when this will work. Okay, I went over these points. Another one is that cars and cars are excluded. That would be under your auto insurance. And then property stored outside is also excluded. Okay, and then I went through these, but I just want to reiterate, it does not cover you if your home is the only one that is flooded, your contents are in a basement or room that's below ground, or they're damaged by mildew or mold that could have been prevented. So there's a lot of tricky language, right? I think that's the key. Tips to save money. I wanted to make sure that I included this one because seeking a proactive insurance agent is really an important part of this process because they can help you understand all of these pieces and explain it to you and help you buy something that will be a benefit to you. The more that we shop online, the more we might not know what pitfalls there are, might not know, might be shopping just for the bottom line of dollars when really insurance can be very tricky. But for your home insurance or your renter's insurance, if you raise that deductible, that's a really important thing that will help you get your price down. And then also you can reduce your premiums if you're less likely to file small claims. That's a really important point because if you have claims on your claim record, that will increase your annual premium. Okay. And then, as I said, you don't have to remember all of this. This was a really in-depth presentation about flood insurance and the importance of it. We have rack cards on flood insurance for renters, just regular old renters insurance and how important that is. And then flood insurance for homeowners, and also just a homeowner's insurance checkup. So we have this whole array that we have here, and that you can order any of these. We're sending some to Thrive, but also you can order them directly. And if you get in your order by the end of the year, they are covered under our Listos grant. And it's a really important thing to stock up so that we can get the word out now, since it does take time for renters insurance, or sorry, for flood insurance to kick in. But then also you can stock up for other disasters as well. A little bit about after the storm. This is, when people don't have flood insurance, or they don't know if they have flood insurance, we ask them to just focus on what was damaged and how much will it cost to repair or replace. And that's really important, because having those numbers are important for trying to find coverage, but also for your FEMA claims, right? FEMA will come in if it's a large enough disaster. But it's important after the storm to really document what was damaged and how much that costs to repair or replace. Remember not necessarily to file claims if they're too small. And then, just remembering that, it can be really difficult if you have flood and homeowners insurance, and some water came from above and some water came from below. A lot of times there's finger pointing. So we do help with all that. The claims problems, are our cup of tea. We can help you be your own best advocate, but when there's problems around coverage, which a lot of times with flood damage, that's the issue, that you just don't have that coverage in your policy. It's extremely difficult to solve. And then we do pop up disaster recovery libraries, even if they're very small disasters, very localized. So we will have information there. And we'll get the word out to those counties to help them through that process. So that is the end of my slideshow. I'm happy to answer any questions. And I just thank you all for getting a really quick and dirty just primer on flood insurance and how important it is. And hopefully it scared you enough to just remember you don't want to go uninsured. And we have the guidance that you need if something does happen.
Thank you, Emily. Do we have any questions? I saw some come in through the chat, but if people want to just start shouting them out, that might be easier for the Q&A. And yes, we will share the slides afterwards.
Is Margaret Bruce was on briefly from the SFC JPA. I don't know if Margaret is still here. I think she said she had to run, but I'm with the East Palo Alto Public Works Commission, and we had her come in. We actually did a walking tour of the bay, which in East Palo Alto, there's two places that can flood. San Francisco Creek, which runs from up in the Santa Cruz Mountains and then ends in the bay, and then also the from the bay itself with sea level rise, that's going to be an increased risk. One of the things that's interesting is if we get the levee built and it's certified by the government, then the requirement for flood insurance goes away. And East Palo Alto is very much at risk of flooding. And previously, we had dirt berms, which literally had squirrel holes going through them that would burst open, like when the creek would rise. And so last year, East Palo Alto did not have extensive flooding. Had some flooding in the area where the creek improvements weren't in place, but there were there were other things. So everybody that I know in East Palo Alto who owns a home is required to have flood insurance if you have a mortgage. So we're already covered. But one of the things that everyone in this group can do is really support the effort of these infrastructure improvements to be done in a sensible way, because there's a lot of environmental concerns, obviously, but that will mitigate the effects of heavy rains and climate change and all that other things. But we did not have extensive flooding in East Palo Alto in a year that we should have we would have if the old infrastructure was still in place on between 101 and the bay. That would have flooded massively into the Gardens neighborhood.
Yeah, and that's important. And the other good thing too is as the infrastructure gets stronger, hopefully your flood insurance rates will go down too. So it's still good to have it, but anything we can do, it's not just a one wand will do it. Just having flood insurance. It's all like Mark said, we're talking about climate change. We're talking about an increase. We're getting prepared for all of that. I see another question. Go ahead.
Emily, thank you so much. That was a really great presentation. My name is McKenna, and I'm a project manager with a new flood and sea level rise agency in San Mateo County, One Shoreline. And one thing we've been thinking about is working with cities on the CRS program, Community Rating System program that's offered through FEMA to improve cities' capacity to take actions, many of which they might already be taking to lower flood insurance premiums within that city. Is that something that you guys work on as well or have familiarity with? We're just learning, and I've heard mixed messages on the CRS program and how it's pretty burdensome for cities as well. So we're just trying to figure out the path forward and what's the most impactful for people who are paying the premiums.
Yeah, it is fairly new, right? It's I think I would say we don't necessarily help that there's especially with the National Flood Insurance Program, it's very much a federal program. And so, even with the conversations about, they're anytime they redo mapping, anything like that, we really don't have that much control. We're always happy to, write a letter of support for a project or something to that effect. And luckily we have some pretty outspoken representatives on the national level, the federal level, to help. But I would say just anything we can do to take advantage of any of the grant funding, the money that's going towards climate change is very much a hot topic right now, and anything you can do to take advantage to get it flowing down to your city and your community is important.
Emily, we have a question in the chat. Would you like me to read it out loud?
Yeah.
All right, so there's someone who says, I'm not in a flood zone, but my house is on the side of a hill, and the lower half of the house has a basement that is below street level. The basement has been flooded 3 times in 30 years. The person tried to get a quote for flood insurance, but the AAA agent stopped following up. They're just asking if they're uninsurable or if that's potentially just an issue with that particular agent.
That is a good question. So on the side of a hill, lower half has a basement. I mean, you would be able to likely get it through the National Flood Insurance Program. It might be an agent issue. The thing to keep in mind though is you want to find someone, one, proactive, and it sounds like this person is not, but also would be able to understand the specifics of your home so that they can explain to you, well, actually the basement isn't going to be, anything in the basement isn't going to be covered, but that doesn't mean that the structure will still be covered. It's just the belongings. And so, I would say find someone who is proactive and is great. It might not necessarily be your AAA agent. It could, you can get flood insurance. And maybe the private companies would be another route to go to really shop around, and see. It's unique for each house. When we're talking about hillside, I think it feels oftentimes like a lot of the guidance is for a very specific home where it's like, I can see the home and this is it. And here's the drawing of that, of what that house might look like, when in reality, homes can be, look very different. And that's the issue that we see in the claim space is that, you have to have as much documentation beforehand so you can show your adjusters similarly. They're thinking of it through like one lens, and it's like, well, here's what I have, and actually this part was above ground, that sort of thing. So thank you.
And NFIP doesn't turn people away. Is that correct?
It doesn't, but it also has very specific It's very much a bare bones policy. It's a federal program. It was put in place after the private insurance, or private insurance, like your name brands, right? They decided to stop covering any type of flooding. And because it's such a big risk in this country, that's why the program was created, because we still have to have some sort of safety net for homeowners. But that being said, it's very bare bones, and it's really basically just to put a structure back. It's different in the sense where a traditional homeowners insurance policy is to make you whole again, to replace what you had. And the NFIP is really to just basically give you a structure again. Very different.
Emily, I was wondering what kind of data sources insurance companies are typically using to determine premiums beyond claims, because we do have a lot of data sources coming out in recent years. Some of them are for current risk and some of them are projected risk for flood. And then adding complexity to it, I think, is that my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the FEMA maps don't include pluvial flooding. It's one of the three that they don't include. I'm pretty sure it's pluvial flooding. I'm sure insurance companies don't like that. So how are they filling that gap in knowledge to make sure that they're covering themselves, and how does that affect premiums for customers?
Yeah. So again, there are two separate buckets of these insurance companies. There's the National Flood Insurance Program, which they don't really care, right? They're like, here's what we offer, here's our maps, and they might be old, but here's the premium. If you go to it doesn't matter particularly what agent you go to, the premium will be the same no matter who you go to, as long as the factors are the same. This level of coverage, if both agents would give you the same quote for that, similar to California Earthquake Authority, where any agent would still offer you the same premium. As but for private flood insurance companies, for regular homeowners insurance policies, companies, they don't care because they're not covering that damage, right? They are more focused on wildfire risk or other types of risks. They do not cover that damage. For private flood insurance companies, that's a good question of how they're doing it, because they are private companies. They are typically, and this is going to get a little technical, but they are non-admitted insurance companies. So there are layers of insurance companies. There's your name brands, and they are regulated by the Department of Insurance. They have to follow certain rules. They're regulated, so that's the State Department. For private insurance companies, they still have to follow some rules, but the way they make rates and that sort of thing, they're less regulated. That doesn't necessarily mean they're not financially strong, but say, they think of like a Lloyd's of London, right? So they're actually out of London, but they will cover your risk here. And so a lot of times that's their secret sauce, how they're taking into consideration what data mapping, what technology they're using. That's kind of in their secret sauce, and they don't have to disclose that to set their rates.
And there's nothing that they're prohibited from considering. For example, different climate projections of flood patterns in the future. I was under the impression they weren't allowed to look at that when determining their policy, but you're just saying it's kind of secret, so no one knows if they're doing it or not.
That's different. So in admitted companies that are regulated, you're right, the admitted companies, the state of California regulates, they were not able to do it in California. They are able to do it in other states. But that is for your name brand companies that don't cover flood. So when we're talking about floods, those companies are a separate bucket of non-admitted insurers, and they can use whatever mapping they want.
Do we have other questions?
I can't find the hand to raise. So my question is, do you know if we have data on what are the areas where you have kind of the insurance in the cities and the areas where people has better insurance, or is this on a central place that we know is like, oh, 100% of the houses have insurance and this is the type of insurance,
Yeah.
to really understand in case of a disaster and kind of how big is this problem? Because I know that, generally speaking, a lot of people is underinsured. So do we have
Yeah,
data?
that's a really good question. I don't have that data. I would assume that that is a tough one. I would assume that if you wanted to get that data, the Department of Insurance would have to do a data call to all the insurance companies and have some sort of, they could probably gather it by zip code. That might be a way to do it, right? Like, so it's out there, but it's with different companies, so it's not all in
Yeah.
one central place. It's very, it's like a 2-level question where, like, what communities have renters insurance or homeowners insurance, and then of those, which ones also have flood insurance. And you could even add the earthquake insurance layer on there. But that's a really expensive thing to do for to ask someone to spend that money on, because those two risks are very much separate policies. If you actually have that risk, it's almost the same. It feels like, I mean, every situation is a little different, but it's the same amount. So you're actually paying for 3 separate policies that cost generally in the same area. And so, it's difficult. I think that when we talk about it, we as in our organization talk about it, it's really making that decision of like, okay, well, if you're not going to have that kind of coverage, what can you do to make your home and your property more secure? Like, okay, if you're not going to spend an extra $300 a year on that, well, can you stock up on sandbags? Can you make sure you have a plan to get your things up? Maybe you'll use that money to reinforce some windows or something to that effect. What can you do? And that's for homeowners and renters as well, and if anything, just talking about it, just talking about your plan. And I think, especially for community organizations, and just you and your colleagues, just talking about, okay, well, if we're expected to do this after a disaster, if we're going to be helping our community, what does our own home look like? Will we be able to do that? Or will we be up to water and we're going to be helping helping our kids get relocated and helping, all that stuff, things dry out, and being on the phone with restoration contractors. I think that's like the other thing is, when people have big claims, it feels like a second full-time job, right? So just making sure we're all prepared, so that we can help people as well, is an important piece there.
So can I ask a follow-up question to that? So I'm just thinking about in terms of what can we do, since you don't really have, if you're thinking about prevention, the only thing that I can think is, and please help me if I'm in the wrong direction, is really try to encourage people to think about these things and to assess their own risk. The problem that we have is that people who has the means and power and understand these are probably very positioned to really understand the risk. But when you're thinking about marginalized communities, you're thinking about people who's not even thinking about these things, just kind of reacting to what's happening. So awareness maybe is something that we can try to promote, that this is important. As like, I really like how you started. It's like, when we think about disaster, it's like, oh, okay, what are the things that you need to keep in the house and all this stuff, but this is actually critical, because it's everything that happened after, which is a nightmare for people. So
yeah, definitely. And it's very difficult to say, the one thing we try to communicate is that there's no one path. There's no, you should buy flood insurance. Like, you didn't hear me say you should buy flood insurance. You and you and you. It's not that easy to say that is the best place for you to put your money, right? So it's really saying that this is a product that you can buy. If you buy it, we want you to know what it does cover and what it doesn't cover, so you're not surprised. And it's about building a plan for yourself, and just remembering that, we are all vulnerable for natural disasters. And, you know, the more you can have the brain space to think, okay, well, like, what would we do? What would my family do if that happened? Would we be able to just pick up and go to my sister's house? Or do I not have that option? Like, just having those conversations, and those are really community and close-knit conversations to have. But you know, that ends with, and if you have, you know, if you have enough food on the table, and if you have you know, and if you feel fairly secure, then you can have that conversation of, well, I do have renter's insurance and I have flood insurance. I know that this is a big risk. And you know, the hard thing is, especially in the Bay Area, sometimes it's, you know, you don't have options to move out of a flood area, flood zone. So, you know, it is a very specific, you know, conversation to have, but it's about having these conversations, about having it be part of the conversation.
Mark, why don't you go ahead and then I'll follow up.
Okay, hi. Great presentation. I've actually been on calls before and with flood insurance people, and you've explained it a lot in more, you know, layman's term than the guy from the federal government. But one thing I'd like to mention, and I think this is important, is that, you know, East Palo Alto, for as part of phase 2 of the SFCJPA, is going to be having flood improvements, and this is going to affect all the renters in, you know, the west side of East Palo Alto, Woodland Park, if you know that at all. One of the things that's really important is that this is necessary, but it's going to be hell on earth for the people living there for a couple of years while they have extremely heavy construction. You know, I've had some pretty detailed discussions on what that's going to involve, and it's going to be loud, it's going to be noisy. A lot of people are going to want to move away from naturally affordable housing. So it's necessary, but it's also going to be like living in a war zone for a while, just because this is really heavy construction. And then when you couple that with some of the planned apartment construction in East Palo Alto, which is also going to be loud and noisy, East Palo Alto, which has some of the most vulnerable populations and also is affected by flooding. These are the areas that flooded in East Palo Alto. You know, it's going to be a huge impact, even though it will result in less flooding down the road and less need for flood insurance.
Emily, could you just give an overview of when mold is and is not covered by either flood or homeowner? And I'm sorry if that can't be brief, but I'm assuming it works in a similar way.
That's a great question. So it may vary with each policy. Some policies have a cap on mold. Some policies don't. Some policies will in the context of like something is happening immediately and then mold is there. Usually that's covered. It's really hidden mold damage. You know, insurance doesn't really cover existing things, slow things, wear and tear, maintenance things. And so really you'd want to make sure what the specific wording in your policy is about mold, and that it is identified and documented and remediated as soon as possible. Those are the two things, like that you have to be able, with a lot of things with insurance, you have to be able to connect at claim time. You have to connect this thing happened and it caused this that just happened right after it, and we have coverage, so we're going to take care of both of them. It gets really difficult when it's like something happened and that when it gets to a gray area where like, well, it could have been caused by this or it could have been caused by that, then that's when it just becomes a fight or a claim denial. The other big thing I want to remind everybody while we're in kind of peacetime is that just because your insurance company says no, that does not mean the end. And for a lot of people who've never been through the claims process or don't quite think of themselves as squeaky wheels or don't know to push back or, you know, get these serious things, it feels really awful to hear a no, and it feels like a door is slammed in your face and that you will not get access to the money or the benefits that you paid for. When in reality, you can file a complaint with the Department of Insurance. You can hire a professional. A lot of times with insurance, claims are on a contingency fee, meaning you don't pay an hourly rate to an attorney. It would be, they will take your case, and if there's an outcome, they will take a certain percentage. And so there are other things that you can do if it gets to that point. But we never want people to feel that like a final no or a lowball amount is the end of the story. And we see time and time again that if you just don't know that you can say, well, I disagree. Like something as simple as that, if you just don't know that you can say that, you don't. And you get taken advantage of, you get that low offer, or you get that no, and you just take it as the final, when there are other things that you can do. Your job in that time is to, like we said, make sure that you're also documenting the damage, and you're finding people to give you an estimate for what it would cost to replace it. There are things that you can do to prove your claim. Unfortunately, we never hear this in the commercials. You hear a snap, you get your money, right? But it's a really big process, and it's important for all of us, especially our awesome 211 folks who, hear people in their time of need, to remember that like, oh, well, maybe that's not a final no. And the Department of Insurance can look into it, or you can hire somebody. Insurance is one of those few things where you do have access to other resources that they just don't tell you. You're not like a team going through your claim together, right? It's a business negotiation. And then finally, the last thing I wanted to say, there's one other good point I had. My doorbell totally took it right out of my brain. So just to remember that it's a business negotiation. There are options. You can go to the Department of Insurance and they can help you as well. So.
And when should they call United Policyholders?
We are your self-help, right? We're helping you along the way, understand the process, get through it, do everything that you can on your own. And then if you've done everything you can and they're still giving you a hard no, that's when we pass you off to the department, or that's when we recommend that maybe it is professional help that's needed. So we're your self-help advocate. So we'll help you educate around the process, how to write a letter, how to be your own best advocate, what to do, just what the process is like. And so that you can walk that process. And then, and then hopefully that is all you'll need.
Thank you, Emily. We will send the recording and your slide deck out to everyone who joined today and everyone on the COED mailing list, so that you can share these resources with your organizations, with your communities. And you can always go to United Policyholders websites. They have lots of resources on their page. All right. Thank you so much, Emily.
Yeah, thank you. I hope everyone has a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.